The shakuhachi is a Japanese end-blown flute. It was originally introduced from China into Japan in the 8th century and underwent a resurgence in the early Edo period. The shakuhachi is traditionally made of bamboo, but versions now exist in ABS and hardwoods. It was used by the monks of the Fuke school of Zen Buddhism in the practice of suizen. The instrument is tuned to the minor pentatonic scale. Overview: the name shakuhachi means 1.8 shaku, referring to its size. It is a compound of two words. Shaku is an archaic unit of length equal to 30.3 cm and subdivided in 10 subunits. Hachi means 8, here 8 sun, or tenths of a shaku. Thus, shakuhachi means 1 shaku 8 sun, the standard length of a shakuhachi. Other shakuhachi vary in length from about 1.3 shaku up to 3.3 shaku. Although the sizes differ, all are still referred to generically as shakuhachi. Shakuhachi are usually made from the root end of a bamboo culm and are extremely versatile instruments. Professional players can produce virtually any pitch they wish from the instrument, and play a wide repertoire of original Zen music, ensemble music with koto, biwa, and shamisen, folk music, jazz, and other modern pieces. Much of the shakuhachi's subtlety lies in its rich tone coloring, and the ability for its variation. Different fingerings, embouchures and amounts of meri can produce notes of the same pitch, but with subtle or dramatic differences in the tone coloring. Holes can be covered partially and pitch varied subtly or substantially by changing the blowing angle. The honkyuku pieces rely heavily on this aspect of the instrument to enhance their subtlety and depth. Unlike a recorder, where the player blows into a duct a narrow airway over a block which is called a fipple a and thus has limited pitch control, the shakuhachi player blows as one would blow across the top of an empty bottle and therefore has substantial pitch control. The 5-finger holes are tuned to a pentatonic scale with no half tones, but using techniques called meri and kari, in which the blowing angle is adjusted to bend the pitch downward and upward, respectively. The player can bend each pitch as much as a whole tone or more. Pitches may also be lowered by shading or partially covering finger holes. Since most pitches can be achieved via several different fingering or blowing techniques on the shakuhachi, the timbre of each possibility is taken into account when composing or playing. The shakuhachi has a range of 2 full octaves and a partial third octave. The various octaves are produced using subtle variations of breath and embouchure. A 1.8 shakuhachi produces D4 as its fundamental the lowest note it produces with all 5-finger holes covered, and a normal blowing angle. In contrast, a 2.4 shakuhachi has a fundamental of A3. As the length increases, the spacing of the finger holes also increases, stretching both fingers and technique. Longer flutes often have offset finger holes, and very long flutes are almost always custom-made to suit individual players. Some honkyuku, in particular those of the Nezusa school, are intended to be played on these longer flutes. Due to the skill required, the time involved, and the range of quality and materials to craft bamboo shakuhachi, one can expect to pay from $300 to $5,000 for a new or used flute. Because each piece of bamboo is unique, shakuhachi cannot be mass-produced, and craftsmen must spend much time finding the correct bore shape for each individual flute to result in correct pitch over all notes. Specimens of extremely high quality, with valuable inlays, or of historical significance can fetch $10,000 or more. Plastic or PVC shakuhachi have some advantages over their traditional bamboo counterparts. They are lightweight, extremely durable, nearly impervious to heat and cold, and typically cost less than $100. Shakuhachi made of wood are also available, typically costing less than bamboo but more than synthetic materials. Nearly all players, however, prefer bamboo, citing tonal qualities, aesthetics, and tradition. History. The bamboo flute first came to Japan from China during the 6th century. The shakuhachi proper, however, is quite distinct from its Chinese counterpart the result of centuries of isolated evolution in Japan. During the medieval period, shakuhachi were most notable for their role in the Fuke sect of Zen Buddhist monks, known as kamusa, who used the shakuhachi as a spiritual tool. Their songs were paced according to the player's breathing and were considered meditation as much as music. Travel around Japan was restricted by the shogunate at this time, but the Fuke sect managed to wrangle an exemption from the shogun, since their spiritual practice required them to move from place to place playing the shakuhachi and begging for alms. He persuaded the shogun to give them exclusive rights to play the instrument. In return, some were required to spy for the shogunate, and the shogun sent several of his own spies out in the guise of Fuke monks as well. This was made easier by the wicker baskets that the Fuke wore over their heads, a symbol of their detachment from the world. In response to these developments, several particularly difficult hokkyuku pieces, for example, Shika no Tone, became well known as tests. If you could play them, you were a real Fuke. If you couldn't, you were probably a spy and might very well be killed if you were in unfriendly territory. With the Meiji Restoration, beginning in 1868, the shogunate was abolished and so was the Fuke sect, in order to help identify and eliminate the shogun's holdouts. The very playing of the shakuhachi was officially forbidden for a few years. Non-Fuke folk traditions did not suffer greatly from this, since the tunes could be played just as easily on another pentatonic instrument. However, the hokkyuku repertoire was known exclusively to the Fuke sect and transmitted by repetition and practice, and much of it was lost, along with many important documents. When the Meiji government did permit the playing of shakuhachi again, it was only as an accompanying instrument of the koto, shamisen, etc. It was not until later that hokkyuku were allowed to be played publicly again as solo pieces. Shakuhachi has traditionally been played almost exclusively by men in Japan, although this situation is rapidly changing. Many teachers of traditional shakuhachi music indicate that a majority of their students are women. The 2004 Big Apple Shakuhachi Festival in New York City hosted the first ever concert of international women shakuhachi masters. This festival was organized and produced by Ronnie Nyagetsu Reishin Seldin, who was the first full-time shakuhachi master to teach in the Western Hemisphere. Nyagetsu also holds 2 daishin licenses, and has run Kei Suizen, the largest and most active shakuhachi dojo outside Japan, since 1975. The first non-Japanese person to become a shakuhachi master is the American-Australian Riley Lee. Lee was responsible for the World Shakuhachi Festival being held in Sydney, Australia over July 8, 2008, based at the Sydney Conservatorium of Music. Riley Lee played the shakuhachi and dawn mantras, which was composed by Ross Edwards especially for the dawn performance which took place on the sails of the Sydney Opera House at sunrise on January 1, 2000 and televised internationally. Notable players. The International Shakuhachi Society maintains a directory of notable professional, amateur, and teaching shakuhachi players. Recordings. The first shakuhachi recording to appear in the United States was Bell Ringing in an Empty Sky, performed by Goro Yamaguchi for Nonasuch Explorer Records on LP. New recordings of shakuhachi music are relatively plentiful, especially on Japanese labels and increasingly so in North America, Europe, and Australia. Although the instrument is sometimes considered quaint and outdated in Japan, it is experiencing growth overseas. The primary genres of shakuhachi music are hokkyuku, sankyuku, shinkyuku. Shakuhachi are often used in modern film scores, particularly ones by James Horner. Films in which it is featured prominently include The Karate Kid Parts 2 and 3 by Bill Conti, Legends of the Fall and Braveheart by James Horner, Jurassic Park and its sequels by John Williams and Don Davis, and The Last Samurai by Hans Zimmer and Memoirs of a Geisha by John Williams. Renowned Japanese classical and film score composer Toru Takemtsu wrote many pieces for shakuhachi and orchestra, including his well-known Celeste, Autumn and November Steps. In the domain of contemporary music, Carlo Filippi's composition for shakuhachi and guitar arjetsu is one of the most challenging works ever written for the instrument. The performance techniques present notable difficulties in a few completely novel situations. An audacious movement of a Euro expansion, a Euro unregistered trademark of the respective traditions of the two instruments pushed as they are at times to the limits of the possible, the aim being to have the shakuhachi and the guitar playing on the same level and with virtuosity, thus increasing the expressive range, the texture of the dialogue, the harmonic dimension and the tone color. Brian Ritchie of the Violent Femmes formed a jazz quintet in 2002 called the NYC Shakuhachi Club. They play avant-garde jazz versions of traditional American folk and blues songs with Ritchie's shakuhachi playing as the focal point. In 2004 they released their debut album on Weird Records. Synthesized shakuhachi. The sound of the shakuhachi is also featured from time to time in non-traditional non-Japanese music, from electronica to pop rock to jazz music, especially after being commonly shipped as a preset instrument on various synthesizers and keyboards beginning in the 1980s. Here is a short list of well-known tracks from various musical genres where you can hear the sound of an electronic or emulated shakuhachi. See also, embouchure, hochiku, kna, shakuhachi musical notation, shakuhachi players, silencio saluna, B2E unregistered trademark. A registered trademark IO/ALM Records ALCD 76. References. Further reading, Iwamoto Yoshikazu, The Potential of the Shakuhachi in Contemporary Music, a OE Contemporary Music Review Euro, 8/2, 1994, pages 5-44, Zukitani Tsuneko, The Shakuhachi and Its Music, in Alison McQueen Tokita, David W. Hughes, The Ashgate Research Companion to Japanese Music 7, Aldershot, Ashgate, 2008, pages 145-168, Riley Lee. Yearning for the Bell. A Study of Transmission in the Shakuhachi Honkyuku Tradition, Thesis, University of Sydney, Siyama Taru, The Recontextualization of the Shakuhachi and Its Music from Traditional Classical into Modern Popular, a OEV World of Music Euro, 40/2, 1998, pages 69-84. External links, International Shakuhachi Society, Shakuhachi at DMOZ, Shakuhachi Flute Fingering Chart, Fuke Shakuhachi official site.